Last season, people were paying $8,000 to watch the Indiana Fever play a regular season game. $8,000. Not the finals. Not a playoff series. A Tuesday night game in the WNBA. Now, you can get in for $12. 12. That's less than a movie ticket. Less than 2 coffees. Less than the parking you pay just to walk inside Gamebridge Fieldhouse. So what happened? How does a franchise go from the hottest ticket in American sports, any sport, any league, to resale prices that wouldn't fill a minor league hockey rink? How does a team with the most famous basketball player on the planet, a genuine once-in-a-generation talent, end up with visible gaps in the upper deck less than 12 months later? That's not a small question. That's the question. And the answer is more uncomfortable than most people want to admit, because this isn't just a story about ticket prices. It isn't just about wins and losses. It isn't even really about Caitlin Clark, and we're going to be extremely clear about that. This is a story about what happens when an organization is handed the greatest gift in the history of their franchise, and the product around that gift isn't ready for the spotlight. This is about depth, or more precisely, the terrifying lack of it. Let's set the scene properly, because context matters here. When Caitlin Clark was drafted first overall by the Indiana Fever in 2024, the WNBA didn't just get a new player, it got a cultural detonation. Attendance records shattered. Television ratings jumped by numbers the league hadn't seen in 2 decades. Casual sports fans who had never watched a single WNBA game in their lives suddenly knew the Fever's schedule better than they knew their own teams. The energy was unlike anything women's basketball had experienced in the modern era. Arenas across the league expanded capacity just for Fever road games. The New York Liberty moved to a bigger venue. Washington did the same. Ticket platforms were overwhelmed. Broadcast numbers climbed every single week. It felt like the beginning of something massive, and in many ways it was. But here's what nobody was saying loudly enough during all that celebration. Caitlin Clark cannot play 48 minutes every night. And the moment she sits down, the moment foul trouble hits or fatigue sets in, or a coach needs to rest a star, something goes very, very wrong on that floor. The energy doesn't just dip. It falls off a cliff because the players around her aren't built to carry the weight. Not yet. Maybe not even close. And fans, especially the casual fans filling those upper sections, the ones who drove 2 hours and paid for parking and bought overpriced nachos, those fans feel immediately. They don't need advanced analytics to tell them what they're seeing. They feel the difference. They feel the drop. They feel the moment a competitive game becomes something they're simply waiting to end. And once a fan feels that enough times, they start making a different decision on game night. That decision shows up in the resale market. That decision shows up in the upper deck. That decision shows up as a $12 ticket for a team that was selling seats for $200 just 1 year ago. Now here's where this gets genuinely complicated and genuinely uncomfortable for the organization. The Fever knew what they were getting into. They drafted Clark knowing the spotlight would be blinding. They knew expectations would be historic. They had an entire offseason to build a roster capable of holding the weight of that moment. So what they build? That answer is going to make some people very angry. And we're going to get into every detail of it. But before we do, you need to understand something about Caitlin Clark's actual numbers this season, because it reframes everything that follows in a way that makes the roster situation even more alarming than it already looks. Let's talk about what Caitlin Clark is actually doing on that basketball court. Because if you're going to understand why the empty seat story is so devastating, you first have to understand just how extraordinary her performance has been. She is playing at an elite level. Full stop. Her shooting range is genuinely unprecedented for this league. She's pulling up from distances that most WNBA guards don't even attempt in warm-ups, 28, 29, sometimes 30 feet, and converting at a rate that forces opposing coaching staffs to completely redesign their defensive schemes. Think about what that means tactically. When a defender has to guard a player 30 feet from the basket, the entire defensive structure stretches. Lanes open, driving angles shift. Help defense collapses differently. It creates space that other players should be able to exploit. Her court vision is equally elite. She sees passes before they're open. She delivers the ball to spots her teammates haven't even reached yet. Her assist numbers have continued to climb because she's genuinely running an offense, not just occupying position. And yet, look at the Fever's record when Clark is on the floor versus when she sits. Look at what happens in the stretches, even short stretches, when she's on the bench. The offensive efficiency doesn't just drop, it collapses. Points dry up, ball movement stagnates. Defenses relax because suddenly there's no threat that demands their full attention. The Fever become, in those minutes, an average team fighting to tread water. And that is not Caitlin Clark's failure. That is a roster construction failure. Plain and simple. Here's the brutal truth about depth in professional basketball, and this applies to the NBA, the WNBA, every level of the sport. A star player doesn't make a team good. A star player amplifies what's already there. If the supporting cast is strong, a transcendent player makes them championship level. If the supporting cast is weak, even the most transcendent player in the world can only do so much before the weight becomes impossible to carry alone. Golden State didn't win championships because of Steph Curry alone. They won because Draymond Green and Klay Thompson and a deep roster of intelligent, capable players were operating at a level that made Curry's brilliance sustainable. Now look at Indiana's roster and ask yourself honestly, who on that team, aside from Clark, genuinely terrifies an opposing defense? Who can create their own shot in a half-court set when the defense locks up Clark? Who can close a game when the star is in foul trouble? Who gives this team a second identity, an alternative threat that keeps defenses honest even when Clark needs rest? The answers are uncomfortable, because right now, in critical moments, the answer to most of those questions is nobody consistent enough. And opposing coaches have figured this out. They've watched the film. They've run the numbers. They know that if they can make the game difficult for Clark, double teams, physical contact, forcing the ball out of her hands, the offensive output of this team changes dramatically. So that's exactly what they do. And here's where it gets painful for fans sitting in those upper sections. When you watch a game and you can see the opposing team's strategy working. When you can see that the defense has essentially conceded Clark's occasional brilliance because they know the supporting cast won't punish them. The game stops feeling competitive. It starts feeling inevitable. And fans don't pay to watch inevitable. They pay to watch uncertain. They pay to watch tension. They pay to watch a team that makes them believe, quarter after quarter, that tonight might be special. When that belief fades, the upper deck empties, not out of disrespect for Caitlin Clark, out of disappointment in everything surrounding her. But here's what makes this situation even more complex. And this is a part that nobody in the mainstream conversation is discussing clearly. The Fever's front office made very specific decisions this offseason. Decisions about which players to retain, which veterans to pursue, which needs to prioritize. And when you look at those decisions through the lens of what this team desperately needed to support its franchise player, the choices they made, or more accurately, the choices they didn't make, tell a story that's hard to defend. We're going to lay it all out. Every decision, every gap, every moment where the organization had a chance to build something worthy of the spotlight they were handed. And then we're going to tell you what happens next, because this story isn't over. Not even close. Front offices don't always get the credit or the blame they deserve. When a team wins, we celebrate the players. When a team struggles, we analyze the coaches, the people making roster decisions, the ones sitting in conference rooms choosing which players to sign, which needs to address, which gambles to take. They operate mostly in the background until the product falls apart in plain sight. Then the decisions become impossible to ignore. Let's talk about what the Indiana Fever front office knew when this offseason began. They knew they had the most marketable player in the history of their franchise. They knew every game would be televised, scrutinized, and dissected. They knew casual fans had flooded into the stands expecting a competitive, entertaining team built around their star, not just featuring her. They knew all of this, and they had resources. The Clark effect had generated revenue that previous Fever rosters could never have imagined. Sponsorship dollars, broadcast money, ticket revenue even at the discounted resale prices was still higher than pre-Clark baselines. So the question isn't whether they had the means to build a deeper roster. The question is why the depth still isn't there. And this is where we have to talk specifically because vague criticism isn't fair to anyone. The Fever's perimeter depth remains a significant vulnerability. When Clark is pressured into difficult shots or turnover, the team's offensive options narrow quickly. There is no consistent secondary ball handler capable of relieving pressure and maintaining offensive flow. That's not a minor gap. In a league where defensive schemes are increasingly Clark-specific, a reliable secondary creator is essential. Down low, the rebounding and interior presence have been inconsistent. Games are being lost not just in the final minutes, but in the middle quarters, when defensive rebounds lead directly to transition opportunities for opponents, opportunities that a deeper, more athletic front court would eliminate, and perhaps most critically, closing lineups. The players on the floor in the final 3 minutes of tight games have to inspire confidence. Fans watching those moments, in the arena and at home, need to believe this team can execute when it matters. Too often this season, those closing moments have felt uncertain in the wrong way. Not exciting uncertainty, nervous uncertainty. The kind that sends people to the parking lot early. Now, here's where this becomes genuinely important to understand. Building a WNBA roster isn't simple. The salary cap is strict. The player pool is competitive in ways that casual fans don't always appreciate. Signing elite talent in this league requires timing, relationships, and sometimes a willingness to pay at the top of the market. But other organizations have done it. Teams have identified Clark's emergence as a rising tide and positioned themselves to compete. The Fever, by contrast, have appeared at times to be playing catch-up rather than setting the standard. And the fans who were paying $8,000 for seats last year, they can see the difference between catch-up and championship-level construction. Here's the data point that crystallizes all of this. In games where Clark plays heavy minutes without foul trouble and the game remains competitive into the fourth quarter, attendance perception is strong. Post-game sentiment on social media is positive. People leave talking about what they saw. In games where Clark is limited, by fouls, by rest, by game management, and the supporting cast has to carry the load, the product visibly suffers. And the fans in those upper sections, the ones who drove in from outside Indianapolis, the ones who brought their daughters because they wanted them to see what possible looks like in women's sports, those fans feel the gap between what they expected and what they experienced. That gap is the real problem, not Caitlin Clark. The gap between her excellence and everything the organization has built around it. But here's what we haven't talked about yet, and it might be the most important piece of this entire conversation. There are signs that the Fever organization is starting to understand what they're looking at. And if those signs are pointing where we think they're pointing, what comes next for this franchise could change the trajectory of the entire WNBA. Or it could be too late. The answer to which one it is starts right now. Here's something that gets lost in every hot take debate, every empty seats headline, every social media argument about whether the WNBA's moment has already peaked. Caitlin Clark is 22 years old. 22. She has played one full professional season. She is already the most recognizable women's basketball player in the country. She is already forcing opposing coaches to game plan specifically for her. She is already operating at an efficiency level that, if sustained over a career, will make statistical conversations about the greatest players in league history unavoidable. She hasn't peaked. She hasn't even come close. And that matters enormously for what happens next, because the story of the Indiana Fever is not a tragedy. Not yet. It's a crossroads. Every franchise gets defining moments. Moments where the decisions made in a short window determine whether an organization becomes legendary or becomes a cautionary tale. The Fever are standing directly in that window right now. The fans sending that loud message with $12 resale tickets and half-empty upper sections aren't abandoning Caitlin Clark. They are, in their own way, demanding better from the organization around her. They are saying, we showed up. We proved the market is real. We proved women's basketball can fill arenas and break records and change conversations. Now, prove that you're going to build something worthy of it. That's not a rejection. That's a demand. And organizations that hear that demand clearly and respond with urgency can turn a dip into a dynasty. So what needs to happen? The Fever need a legitimate secondary creator, a guard or forward who can generate offense independently, force defenses to make choices, and give Clark rest minutes without the offense shutting down completely. This isn't optional. It's the single highest priority addition this roster needs. They need interior toughness, rebounding, defensive physicality that can protect against the transition opportunities teams are currently carving out against them. Clark generates incredible opportunities on offense. Those opportunities mean nothing if the defense gives up easy buckets on the other end. They need closing reliability, players who have proven they can execute in high-pressure moments, players who don't create nervous uncertainty in the fourth quarter. And beyond the roster, the organization needs to accelerate its timeline. The window that Caitlin Clark opens doesn't stay open forever. The casual fans who flooded in during her rookie season are willing to come back, but they need a reason, not just the promise of Caitlin Clark, the promise of a team. Because here's the final truth of this entire conversation. The WNBA's biggest moment in a generation happened when Clark arrived, and instead of becoming a sustained revolution, it risked becoming a reminder of what could have been if the organization around her had moved with the same urgency that the moment demanded. The empty seats are a message. The $12 tickets are a message. The fan who drove 2 hours, brought her daughter, watched the fourth quarter fall apart, and decided not to renew her tickets. She's sending a message. The question is whether Indiana's front office is listening. Because Caitlin Clark is doing everything right. She is showing up, putting up numbers, expanding the game, and carrying a franchise on her back with composure that would be remarkable for a 10-year veteran, let alone a second-year professional. She deserves better than what's been built around her. The fans know it. The league knows it. The ticket market knows it. And if the Fever front office knows it too and responds in kind, this story doesn't end with empty seats. It ends with a championship. And a franchise that proved women's basketball at its highest level is as compelling, as competitive, and as worth watching as anything else in sports. That future is still possible. But it requires more than just having Caitlin Clark. It requires being worthy of her. If you've been watching the situation unfold and you want to see the Fever get it right, drop a comment below. Tell me what move you'd make first if you were running this organization. And if you think the mainstream conversation is completely missing the real story here, share this video. Because this is the conversation that actually matters. We'll see you in the next one.